Hello, I'll make a start now. My name is Martin Flynn. I'm Head of Information Services at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. What I wanted to try and do today was to give you a flavour and a feel of the digital environment that we operate within in the UK as an art library. Invariably, a lot of what I talk about will not be exclusive to art libraries at all. It will be applicable to every library, and it's very difficult just to be narrowly national in the approach. So several of the organisations and initiatives I talk about will be international in flavour as well. I've set the presentation within a theoretical framework. I really don't expect you to agree with my theories at all, and it probably doesn't matter that much, because the main thing I want to do is just give you a feel of the environment we're working in, what works within that digital environment, what doesn't work, what lessons might be learned from what's happening now and what's happened in the recent past. I'm aware that it's very easy to, with hindsight, to look back and be critical, and I really don't want to appear smug at all, because all of the initiatives that I'm talking about were developed with great energy, enthusiasm, imagination. Okay, some of them didn't work out, but if you don't try, how are you ever going to move somewhere? I will also argue that there is a problem. Most of what I'm talking about is publicly funded libraries, and there are cultural problems that I think are constraints in working within the public service. But let's move on. The title I will explain in a minute. My job is, one of my main responsibilities is the public service in the National Art Library, which is in the V&A. One of the biggest problems that the National Art Library had, and I suspect still has, is that nobody's ever heard about it, and I'm talking about librarians as well. I applied for the job of what was called Head of Access at the time, 7 years ago, and I had worked in art libraries as well as other disciplines within librarianship for quite some time, and even 14 staff within my art library section, half of those had never heard of it. I had never heard of the National Art Library until I saw the job advertised. So a slight problem there in terms of visibility. I think it's getting better. We also within the V&A have a print room where people can view and study photographs, prints, posters, paintings, and material that isn't on display within the museum. We also have an archive of art and design, which is based in a separate building about perhaps 2 kilometres away from the V&A, and that's the archive of both the institution itself, the V&A, and an archive of artists, individual artists, but also producers. That could be companies. Probably useful to stress that the Victoria and Albert Museum is a museum of art and design. It aims to be one of the best design museums in the world. So the focus is very much on applied art, decorative arts, etc. And the art of the book is one of those design disciplines that it concentrates on. Just as a matter of interest, the library has 1 million books stored all across the museum. 99.9999% of those are in closed access, so it's a very labour-intensive service to operate. The themes that I'm going to look at today, just broadly, just some issues around technological innovation, just some general observations. The title that I've given is Closing the Gap. I feel quite strongly that when new technology is developed, we don't really know where it's going to go to. And sometimes we go down blind alleys and we try things out that never get anywhere. And it would be good if we could learn a little bit more from our experiences to make the gap between the invention of the technology and real useful implementation a little bit closer. I also want to look at, compare a couple of museum websites, our own, the V&A and the British Museum. The third theme, I've said aggregated websites, that's a fairly loose term, but basically websites that try and bring together material from several sites. I then want to talk in some detail about library catalogues. It's our biggest public face, or what we consider as our biggest public face with our users. And then finally to talk about commercial publishing. When implementing new technology, I think that there's three phases that we go through. One is adoption. You go out and you buy the computers and you decide we're going to go down a whole new route. The next is adaptation, which is, I think, largely speaking, that you do what you do manually on a machine. And it's a form of a hybrid approach to things, but it doesn't really change your culture, the way you do things. And I would argue that we're still largely stuck in that phase. The third phase, I think the final phase, the most crucial phase, would be absorption. That basically you say, what does this technology allow you to do that's different, that's radically different, and how do we actually change the way we approach things so that we can take complete advantage of that rather than just mechanize what was done manually, which I think happens. The fourth point is the point that I made about closing the gap, this time lag for full understanding. So I just wanted to give some examples of some technological developments, just to, I think there are some patterns that emerge, but let's see. I'm going to look at early printed books, the invention of the mobile phone, what's been happening with televisions and videos, digital radio, and then interactive digital television. But let's have a look anyway and see. Early printed books, I think this happens with a lot of technologies. The first thing that people want to do is to create something that looks just like the manuscript edition of a book. And this is actually a printed book, although it looks like a manuscript. It looks like a hand-painted, illuminated manuscript. So the text is printed, but somebody has actually painted in the images on it. And that's often the way technology goes. And things never really change until, well, there is the situation we're in at the moment in a digital world, it's often compared to the invention of printing, and I'm sure you're familiar with that argument. But I think what's often not recognized is that there was a period of about 100 years after printing was invented when nobody quite knew what was going to happen. There was a lot of turmoil, a lot of chaos, and I think the key moment when things changed was the invention of the Octavo, the small portable book, which I think really changed things culturally for people. The early mobile cell phones, they were initially seen very much as an executive tool and an ordinary telephone on the move. It was never anticipated that teenagers would colonize the product. Texting was really such a minor feature. It was just one of many, many features, and never thought that it would be have such a major impact on life. And camera, video, music, internet, phone apps were all unanticipated. And here's a picture of what it actually looked like. Just to remind you, people walked around the street carrying these. And it was not that long ago. Another example is television. What we've got here, these are more common in libraries than in the rest of life. And it's combined. It was VCR, but then DVD and television. Very, very logical combination to make, but it never really happens. Why? Because I think people change their televisions once every 7 years. They probably bought the video player at a different time. Well, of course, the industry can just sell you two products. Strangely, if you look at radio and recording, particularly the old cassette recording, they became very, very common, that you bought a radio with an integral cassette recorder within it. But it didn't happen with television, so things don't always follow predictable patterns. In Britain, the BBC, our national broadcasting corporation, have put a lot of effort into developing digital audio radio, and it had several problems. One was that you had to buy a new piece of equipment, a dedicated piece of equipment to use it on. It had some wonderful features in that if you're driving along in your car, the reports about the traffic reports would suddenly come in and override what you were listening to on the radio, which I thought was great in theory until I was driving somewhere and the traffic report for somewhere 50 miles away kept interrupting the piece of music that I was listening to. And the idea behind digital audio broadcasting was that we would end up with CD quality radio, that it would be of the finest. But that's never really worked out. So what we find in Britain is that the BBC has put huge amounts of money and effort into digital audio broadcasting, and it's possibly been wasted because they didn't fully anticipate online listening. Very few people are just going to go out and buy a whole new piece of equipment. If you can listen to radio on computer. So the focus is now more towards high-definition radio, recognising that people are less likely to be listening to live broadcasting and wanting to just listen at a time that suits them. I was involved in a project about 10 years ago when the Birmingham City Council was looking at developing a customer relations management system. And this was the time when set-top boxes first appeared for television, where you could look at digital television. And it was firmly believed at the time that this is the way people would get their internet, that they would get it through their television screen. So this is what was meant by interactive digital TV, and we were procuring a £25 million system for customer relation management, and we insisted that all the suppliers told us how their product would work with digital. The reality was that people didn't bother. They wanted to watch television on their televisions, they wanted to entertain themselves. And anyway, trying to work with the handset and control and get I think the same problem exists with touchscreen computers as well, that they're a bit clunky and hard. So it never happened. It was a thought that it might happen, and it didn't. So now to move on to what I'm really interested in, which is to do a comparison between the British Museum and the V&A in terms of the material that we've digitised on our website. There is a difference in the comparison that I'm making. The British Museum, we're just talking about their prints and drawings collection, whereas the V&A, we're talking about prints and drawings, which are actually half of the V&A's whole collection, but a range of other objects as well. So the British Museum has 2 million catalogue entries, sorry about the typing error here, online for their print collecting. And 30% of these have one or more image attached, so that's over 500,000 images, which is incredibly impressive. The way that they've achieved this is very different to the V&A, in that every member of staff who works in the prints and drawings department, as well as cataloguing material, they also are involved in the digitisation process itself. And they use scanners. The V&A has decided not to use scanners because of concerns about preservation. Anyway, that's just a technical detail. So it means that the work of museum curators and museum staff has changed forever, that they will digitise as the norm. I'll explain how we do it in the V&A in a minute. But still, I reviewed this for a talk that I did 2 years ago, and I looked at it again, and I can never find the database within the British Museums. I have to keep searching around, So his 2 million objects, a phenomenal amount of work and energy. And I, as a librarian who's familiar with searching techniques, cannot find it. what chance have the public got of finding it? The other thing is that in museums, I still think that we're obsessed with the belief that that our website is a signposting service, that really people are going to come to the museum. You know, it's just going to. I don't think that it's really, the penny has dropped, that people fully understand that it's a destination in itself. It's not just a signposting service. And the way that people get there is they don't get on a bus and drive down to the British Museum's website and spend a day walking around and having a look at things. It's like a helicopter. They just drop in for a couple of seconds and up and off somewhere else. And they don't come via the website. They tend to come via Google and other search engines. And the British Museum's images are not searchable through Google or Yahoo Images. There's also a problem in that some of the images have fairly poor quality, particularly cartoons where there's text and speech bubbles, etc., and they're just not readable, and I don't think that that's good enough. There's a bit of concern within the museum world about, oh, well, people will take our images and they'll go off and steal them and make money out of them, etc. Again, I'd like to show that the V&A has taken a different approach, and it is not problematic. A very good point about the British Museum is that they engage with users. They welcome, under each image, there's an option for users to add more information, etc. So they do actually engage with their users. And here's, I'm sorry about this. This is just screenshots. They're very boring, but I really didn't want to risk going online, particularly on a Spanish keyboard, because I know I'd probably get lost very easily. But this is an example of what they do. An example of an entry for one image. Again, like the V&A, I have to say they use a lot of museum terminology, which most of the world does not understand. I still think it's worthwhile, though, that those databases, that metadata was put up for all its faults, at least it's there. Victoria and Albert Museum has only half of this number of images. It has 1 million catalogue entry, well, no, half the number of entries. 1 million catalogue entries. Our total number of objects in the museum is nearer 3 million, and only 13% of these has images attached. So that's about 130,000 images. Not quite as good as it sounds, because several of those are duplicates. The way we do it is either dedicated or project staff. So people who work on the curators for posters and prints have nothing to do with the digitisation at all. We have staff who sit in a room and do the digitisation. It's great they can get on with the work uninterrupted, but it does mean that the curators can carry on as they have done for the past 50 or 100 years and ignore the realities of the web. And a lot of them are very enthusiastic about that approach, unfortunately. One of the best things about the V&A website is that our images are searchable through Google Images, and that brings a phenomenal amount of traffic. The presentation is very attractive. The metadata is very variable, I have to say, but that's because we've just taken something that was seen as an in-house activity, cataloguing. Cataloguing was for curators within the V&A to share with curators in the Prado or MoMA or whatever. It was never seen until very recently as something that would have public benefit. And the other thing about the V&A is we don't engage with users. It's very much a one-way process. I think that the V&A has a cultural problem. The V&A set up some blogs recently, but it's not what you and I understand by blogs. I would call it not blogging, but bragging. What they're doing is they're just telling the users, this is the way it is, we are the experts, that's it. They're not actually expecting interaction or feedback from users. Anyway, this is a screenshot of the V&A's main search page. And if you did an image search, it will bring you directly into the image and the metadata that goes with it. Other problems that we've got with it, in both the British Museum and the V&A's website, we have lots of book lists, lots of bibliographies, etc. Both websites have library catalogues on them. In a different part of the website, there is no link between them at all. There is no live link, so you have to either print off the page and then go to the catalogue and search them all over again. And to me, that just really does not seem sensible. The other issue is that there's a considerable amount of duplication of effort and content between the V&A and the British Museum, particularly in relation to prints, because we collect the same things. But really, why are we digitising the same things? The curators would say that there are always slight differences in the print processes between things, but I'm sorry, you know, for a tiny image on the web, or a relatively small image on the web, that's not meaningless at all. As I mentioned, no integrated searching of books, museum objects, and the subject searching is appalling on both sites. It uses terminology that users don't understand, professional jargon, but anyway, the functionality is very poor. Lack of links to book catalogues and lack of visibility within the website. You have to try and guess the bureaucratic makeup of the organisation before you can have a realistic chance of getting into it. Here's a few aggregated websites. I'm just listing a few of them at the moment. VADS, Culture, Culture Online, Every Object Tells a Story, 24-Hour Museum, Intuit, and some more, Suncat, Copac. I'm also going to deal with briefly with artlibraries.net, WorldCat and OCLC. I'm going to deal with them individually. Start off with the VADS website. This was an organisation funded by public money, and it wanted to promote and encourage best practice in the creation, management and preservation of digital resources in the visual arts. And it operated for several years, and then its funding stopped. And this is a big problem for many initiatives. And what it did was it often took bits of other people's websites and presented them better and made them searchable by image search engines like Google. But you have to then ask, well, why did they do that? Collect material from some other websites and make it available in a better way on this website. Why not concentrate on improving the websites that they were engaged to work with? Problem is that VADS has run out of money, run out of grants, and it's desperately trying to make money by selling its services to other universities, museums, etc. But economically, I'm not convinced that this is viable. We'll come back to VADS in a minute, or well, a little bit later in relation to another project. This is something called Culture. Again, was a publicly funded project, and it was looking at institutional repositories in the arts, but within practice-based arts. So we'll be talking about performance, installations, etc. And there's a very poor awareness amongst practice-related arts of the potential of institutional repositories. And it worked together with Southampton University and the University of the Creative Arts to explore the issues surrounding institutional repositories. And this is still a fairly controversial area in Britain as to whether institutions should have a repository. Would small institutions really have the resources to maintain that repository? Should it be for an institution, or should it be for a subject? And then if it's for a subject, what's the purpose of national boundaries? National boundaries are meaningless on the web. Language boundaries would be much more meaningful. So they did some very interesting work where they tried out, there was a video showing an art installation, etc. It was interesting. And now they've run out of money a year ago. And what happens with this? And I just want to point out, this is a problem in the public service in Britain and with government in Britain. they always give grants to something new. But what you have to do as a public organisation is that you have to maybe spend 2 years putting together an application, and you say you're going to deliver such and such in 3 years' time. Now, 5 years in the life of the internet, it's a lifetime away. Yet you're being expected to predict the future, which is impossible. And also the grant funding is always for the newest and the latest project. So there's very little effort put into really learning from what has happened before, learning from the mistakes, developing the idea further. It has to be something entirely new, and I think there's a big flaw within that. And nothing shows it more than a project that was called Culture Online, which was started nearly 10 years ago. And it was our Department of Culture, Media and Sport decided that we are going to make the culture of the United Kingdom available online. It was this big belief, and this was before even, Google was a common feature of people's internet use. And it funded a whole variety of projects and spent £10 million. And this is where the content is now in the National Archives. It's just it's archived for posterity. It has left little and nothing behind after all that money and all that effort. The V&A was involved in one strand of this, which was something called Every Object Tells a Story. We were working together with the broadcaster Channel 4 and a commercial company called Ultralab. And we were basically asking curators and members of the public to tell a little story around an object that was important to themselves. Huge amounts of energy went into this. Technical problems arose. It's disappeared into the ether. It's £1 million or more worth of work. We're told that it may come back again. This is one project that has continued, but I would question how valuable it is. It's continued from Culture Online. It was originally called the 24-Hour Museum. It's now called Culture 24. And it was obviously based on the idea that you can go to the web 24 hours a day and you can find out all about museums. The content is put together by journalists and by some volunteer trainee journalists. But in actual fact, what they put together is not very good. In fact, I'd say it's pretty terrible by comparison to the original websites that they're referring to. And in most cases, they've just cut and pasted the text and put it into this. A lot of people in the museum world say this is the way forward, etc. I personally think that they're wrong. The Museum, Library and Archives Council said that they saw this as the way of delivering a lot of their activities. The Museum, Library and Archive Council will close in 2 years' time through government cuts. I don't know what the point is. Here's where they've done something about the V&A. I don't know what you think about this as a form of presentation on the web. I don't think it's very exciting. But this is how the V&A's own website, I think much, much more lively. I'll move on from that Culture Online project to I'm going to look at a few tools that we use. This is something called SUNCAT. What it means actually is Serials Union Catalogue. So it's a union catalogue put together by an organisation called ADINA, which is based on the academic sector. And it's a way of searching to find out who has got a particular copy of a periodical or serial or magazine. Extremely valuable. But it does concentrate largely on the holdings of university libraries and some national libraries. We're lucky our holdings are within it. But there are major public libraries that have significant holdings of very old runs of journals, etc., and it's not covered by that. And really what you want to do is to get to something that not only brings you to the location of the magazine, but if there's an electronic subscription to that you can click on that, and if your institution has, etc. So it's heading in the right direction, but its coverage is limited, and it's not fully I think, taking advantage of the technology. I don't know how it works in Spanish libraries, but most people in the UK don't start with the library website. Less than 5% do. They usually start with Google Scholar. If they're looking for a magazine, periodical article, they look on Google Scholar, identify it, and then they go to your library catalogue and start looking for it. This is a similar, sorry about, I had the cursor hanging over that, but it's an organisation called Reference Libraries UK, and it's a database that searches across a range of UK catalogues. It's what's called the Russell Group of universities. They're the elite universities in Britain, plus the British Library. We managed to be a part of it. We paid them a lot of money. The Tate Library is part of it. The Tate Library paid them nothing. This is a strange way to do business. It causes quite a bit of friction. Why would you just have one group of universities and not others? There's another organisation called Research Information Network that said there should be one catalogue for all the universities in the UK. I think that that's wrong. I think there should be one catalogue for all of the libraries in the world, but we'll come on to that in a minute. And why would you restrict yourself just to universities? Why would you exclude the British Library? Why would you exclude major reference or research institutions like the V&A, like the British Museum, like the British Library, and 101 others as well? But anyway, this is in the right direction, and it is helpful, particularly in a place like London, where you can often direct somebody to somewhere else that's within easy travelling distance. So it's called, the search engine is called COPAC. The organisation is called Reference Libraries UK. We'll come back to those in a minute, RL UK as an organisation. This is something that we use a lot. At the V&A, about 50%, or a little over 50% of our catalogue is found in WorldCat. And I think my colleagues would agree that we would want 100% of it in WorldCat. And we would like one place where you went to search for books. I know that's not going to happen tomorrow. There's a lot of bad feeling towards OCLC because they are monopolistic, etc. But does anybody see another organisation likely to be able to create this dream? This is OCLC's view of the world. Itself, it has 72,000 members. It would say worldwide, but we accept that it is heavily biased towards the United States. But that is changing. It's taking a more Eurocentric approach. So it has 72,000 out of the 1.2 million libraries worldwide, and it really has net-scale ambitions. It has 170 million records, but in actual fact, over 50 million of these they've added just in the last 18 months. So just think about the scale, the pace of what's happening. It reckons there are 15.5 billion books in libraries around the world, and that there are 5,000 library transactions per second. Every second there are 5,000. It's trying to get across the really net scale of its ambitions. It's showing you how libraries worldwide are a net scalable business, if you like. And they see the choice in the longer term as between collective innovation through one umbrella, such as OCLC, or silo cottage industries. I'll come on to this a little bit more now when we look at catalogues. This is an example. I'm going to be quite critical of catalogues. Catalogues are seen, having your catalogue on the web is seen as the nirvana, as the perfect position to be reached in the museum library world in London. I think there's some problems with that. This is our catalogue. It's Circe Dynex. You'll start with, you have these tabs on it at the top. Look, just like card catalogues. I'm old enough to have, be going up and down card catalogues. A strange message to give to people. It also says, for more information about this item, please click on the contained field, if displayed, or ask a member of staff. You know, you're in Australia. And this is from the first stage of OPACs, when they were just available in the reading room in the library. And it goes back to my original point. This is only adaptation. This is not absorption. Having said that, there's a fantastic amount of metadata in our catalogue. It's just that a lot of it is invisible. Here's another example. We're starting to improve things. We have, for more recent books, we have the book cover. We also have the table of contents in a terrible format, really. If you use Amazon, you actually get the table of contents as it appears in the book. I think we've made a bad choice there. But anyway, I just wanted to show you that we don't have a perfect form of catalogue by any means. But it's getting better, and we do recognise the problems. So let's talk about the general problems with catalogues. I did a survey about 9 months ago of what was on the web about catalogues and where catalogues were going. And I looked at the conclusions of 4 organisations. These were the Library of Congress, the National Library of Australia, the Research Information Network in the UK, and OCLC, again, worldwide. And they all came up with very, very similar conclusions, which were that contents are invisible to search engines. They're databases, they just don't find them. The process of cataloguing is very complex and difficult to master. The National Library of Australia reckons that it takes 2 years after qualification to become a proficient cataloguer. That's a lot, you know. That's coming close to what it takes to be a doctor. Users struggle to understand catalogues. They really don't understand what we put this fabulous over-engineered thing, but the users look at it and they don't get it. Huge duplication of effort in catalogue creation. A doubt about whether the current model, which it's all localized catalogues, is sustainable in the longer term. They're automated versions of card catalogues. This is a picture of me in my earlier in my career. They lack the enhanced features that users have come to expect, particularly in an online world, the things that they expect from Amazon, etc. And they largely concentrate on printed materials. They have confusing search methods, poorly organized results, often search dead ends. And people are, with Google, you will always get an answer, even if it's, did you mean this, or here's something similar. We provide search dead ends, which I think is not adequate in this day and age. So our catalogues are effectively over-engineered, but all that metadata is largely unused and hidden to people. What all of these reports were suggesting, that data was reused at the point of selection. Manual data creation should be limited as much as possible. Local customization of catalogues should really be eliminated as far as possible. If you really want to get to the net scale, you've got to do that. And assisting the searcher by providing hints and suggestions. We should abandon local catalogues in favour of unified catalogues based on either sectoral, national, transnational subject parameters. Our catalogue should understand the common use of terms that are used by ordinary people, and should weigh the results towards these. It should be possible to refine your search through faceted navigation. You should be able to filter your results in various ways. We should be using things that are available out on the net. Library Thing has 16 million user-generated tags. The person who set it up has made an offer to libraries to use those. We don't, largely speaking, at the moment. The quality of cataloguing data should be subservient to the fast turnaround and delivery of library materials, and we should abandon Library of Congress subject headings. That may seem very harsh, but that was said by the Library of Congress, so something happening there, I think. So these are just some of the features that we should be adding into our catalogues. more like this: new book lists, reviews, best match retrieval, no search, see also, see instead, help people. Relevancy ranking in the results, you know, that if you just get 1,000 results and there's no relevancy ranking with them, it's useless. Subject guides, items tagged according to their level. You know, is this a book for the beginner? Is this a book for the domain expert? Summaries, like the snippets that you get on Google, you know, something that just tells you a bit more about the book in the actual search result itself. Links to web resources, online resources, digital resources, full text wherever possible. Yeah, if the book exists on Google Books, it's available for free. Why don't catalogues automatically link to it, and to abstracts? Also to tell you where you can get a copy of this and how you can go about getting a copy of this. One of the main flaws that we've got with catalogues is that for researchers, journals, periodicals are their main source of information. We took the decision not to catalogue the journals. We took the decision to catalogue the box that they're contained within. So it's box number 27, the green one, but not the content. Major problem, so people go elsewhere. Again, more features that we could include within our catalogues, which I've mentioned before. And I wanted to just move on very briefly to talk about two other issues in relation to the art library world in the UK. One is publishing. I think that we've got a real problem with what's happening in publishing. I will stress that it's in our interest to make sure that there's a viable publishing industry at the end of the day. But the publishing industry have no viable strategy, certainly in the UK, for dealing with the network world. Their whole approach to digitised publishing still reflects the historical print products that they have been dealing with, obviously, for hundreds of years. And this is very, very detrimental to the library sector. There's two practices that are really problematic for us. One is bundling. This is where I want to buy a magazine, I want to buy a journal, but I have to buy 50 others that I don't want. Just imagine if you went into El Corte Inglés, went into the fruit section, and you wanted to buy some apples, and you were told that you had to buy oranges and pears and whatever. I mean, you would be entitled to throw the fruit individually at the person who said, you know, are you for real, you know, to say this? The other problem that we have is something called big deals, where a lot of the universities in the UK are spending over half their budget on a range of digital products with one publisher only. And every year, the price of that goes up 8%, even though there's no delivery, there's no bookshop, there's no printing, there's no, and, you know, the transaction costs are nil. It's just the push of a button to send it. I didn't put this in my paper because I didn't want to be sued for libel by naming individual publishers. But here's an example of what happens in publishing. This is Who's Who. Standard library product, except very, very old-fashioned now. It's printed on very thin paper with very, very small print, and it's full of army generals and royal family and things like that. Where really, if you want to know who's who, go onto Wikipedia. You know, you'll find out what's happening in popular culture. But anyway, it still has its place. It costs about €230 a year. There is an online version of it, which is brilliant, but the only way you can get the online version is by buying the book. So you pay €230 for the book, then you have to pay another €230 for the online version. You can't do it the other way around. That is what we call in England taking the Michael. So the publishing world is going between panic and denial. And to go back to the organisation I mentioned before, Reference Libraries UK, this is confidential, and again, I didn't put it in my paper, but I'm saying it in Spain, so it'll take a long time for it to get back to the publishers in England. The RL UK negotiate these big deals with the publishers, and it comes up next spring. And they have secured an agreement with the vice-chancellors of universities and with university staff that they are not going to accept the price increases. They're going to dig their heels in, and they're going to say they want a major reduction in prices. And if they don't get that major reduction, they're going to stop the subscription. And that's why they've had to get the staff behind them. And I think we have to make a stand. And I think that there's a big role for IFLA, the International Federation of Library Associations, for ARLIS, for various library associations around the world, to really put pressure on publishers, because publishers are producing products which they intend to sell to a few thousand people for large amounts of money. That is not what happens in the internet world. Mobile phone applications is what happens in the internet world. In other words, you produce something for 50 cents and you sell it to millions of people. And that, I think, is the way it will go forward. But publishers, I think, can make more money by doing that, but at the moment they're still stuck with the traditional model. In some cases, there's a website called Ancestry.com, and they sell for probably about €80 an annual subscription to libraries, but also to individuals, because lots of people doing genealogy are more than happy to pay that much. I mean, the services they get are fantastic. It feels pricing-wise more realistic. And the last thing I want to do, and I will do this very quickly, is just look at library culture. I'm just comparing two art library organisations in the UK. But let's start with a problem that relates back to publishing. The publishers, and this is nothing against ProQuest, because they paid for me to go on a study tour of New York, so that's wonderful. But it makes it difficult, because they give Art Library Society UK and Ireland, they give them a grant each year. It becomes difficult, I think, for libraries to then criticise publishers when they're getting sponsorship from them, and we have to be realistic and honest about that. Anyway, I just wanted to show you how the digital world can change the way professional organisations work. ARLIS UK and Ireland has been operating for 40 years. It started at a time when there was an explosion in third-level education, particularly in the arts. There was the art schools, etc., and art librarians, people working in libraries, and those felt they had a lot of common interests, and they joined together, and that was very legitimate. These days, 40 years on, dealing with images, etc., well, everybody needs to deal with images. Jobs for art librarians are actually declining and disappearing. You're expected to be multidisciplinary specialist. So this is the organisation is. I'm a member of their council. So if I'm critical, I'm as critical of myself. But it has 700 members worldwide. People pay a subscription, but 20 years ago you got a newsletter through the post, and that was great. You know, you felt in touch with the world, etc. But you don't need that on the web, and they can put the newsletter on the web. They're aware themselves. They employ a member of staff. They're aware themselves that the long-term future will have to change for them. Their model was copied by Scandinavia, Australia, etc. It has an international status. It's fee-based, but their income is declining, and that is going to decline very, very rapidly. We'll go back to the organisation VADS that we talked about before. VADS supply their website. Every time they want to change a page on the website, they have to pay €600 for half a day's work to change a page on the website. This is not sustainable. And then lastly, to look at another similar organisation which shares membership with ARLIS. This is the Museum Librarians and Archivists Group. This is purely voluntary. There's no fees. There's no bureaucracy at all. I've just a screenshot. They have video on the web. This is their website, but it's actually a blog. And so far, in the last year, they've spent €15 on that blog. And that was just to exclude some advertising. It can do everything that the ARLIS website can do, and several people, I'm a member of this as well, you know, lots of people can change the website, can upload, we can have discussions on things, we have everything. It seems to me that this is more the model that for the future, not just in terms of digital, but I think in terms of operational, you know, that there is a world there, the Wikipedia world, where people are cooperative, you know, and are willing to share their information, etc., and they don't have to travel to a meeting 100 kilometres away and sit for 5 hours and produce 10 pages of minutes on something. You know, people can do this sort of thing very, very quickly. So this is just a little bit of information about ELMLAG. And the same people who attend ARLIS attend ELMLAG, and they act completely differently. When they go to ARLIS, they're very officious and very bureaucratic, and when they go to ELMLAG, they're very relaxed and sharing, etc. It's very strange. Anyway, thank you very much.